Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of our Blair Witch narrative or lore retrospective. In this part, we're going to cover 2 of the major parts of the Blair Witch lore, but before we get into those, let's take a bit to look at the witches' powers themselves, because there's not really a good spot to cover them throughout the series, so let's just do that all up front. So at the end of the first part of our retrospective, Elly Kedward was sentenced to die in the woods, and her body disappeared with the town being cursed. So the biggest question in the Blair Witch mythology is exactly who rules the woods, and who's responsible for all the crazy events we're about to talk about. We know there was an evil in the woods going back to long before Elly and the town of Blair, so did Elly tap into that power to become the vengeful spirit that curses the area now? Or is she simply a victim of that evil and has been turned into its servant? It's impossible to say if it's one or the other, or if they're somehow working together. The curses that befall Blair are very clearly in retaliation to what happened to Elly. So while strange events surrounded the Black Hills Forest beforehand, only after Elly was sentenced did they seem to be targeted and frequent. So really could be either. We might get a hint at an answer in a later video, but for now let's leave it at that. Let's go on to the symbols and the powers that we see throughout the series. If you're not familiar with the movies and just watching this before diving into the game, you might be surprised by some of these. The first up is the stickman figures that we see throughout the series. It's become kind of a symbol of the franchise. Our biggest clue as to what these are came from the retconned version of the trial of Elly Kedward and the Blair Witch PC games, which are not canon, but it still helps. So it's all up in the air as to if this is true or not. It could change with any future stuff, but yeah, this is what we know for now. It's worth mentioning that the PC games refer to the stickmen as Tuana figures. The original trial of Elly Kedward says that Elly learned the primal customs of Tuana from a religious hermit in Ireland. Tuana refers to 9 groups of Native American tribes who lived in the northeast US around that time, around Washington and British Columbia. These are real tribes that they're referencing in the lore. The customs that Elly learned were said to allow her to obtain multiple planes of reality. The stick figures were also said to resemble the way her father was crucified, and since Elly witnessed that, when she's making them, she fills them with her anger. Again, that stuff's not totally canon anymore, but it's the best answer we have as to kind of why she uses these things. The latest Blair Witch movies shows that when one of these figures is made from materials taken from someone, it can act like a voodoo doll, and when damaged, that person will be affected in the same way. This is backed up by an interview with the original creators where when they were making the original movie, the design for the stick figures was supposed to be much more like voodoo dolls, but they had to be simplified for production. The inspiration for what ended up becoming the stickman came from the Transitus Fluvi, the witch's alphabet that was mentioned in the last video. While this plays a lesser role in the franchise, it's definitely an important piece of the puzzle, as characters get marked with these symbols and they appear in places we'll talk about later on. The next kind of symbol of the witch is these basic piles of rocks used throughout the series. In different aspects of the franchise, these were said to have marked graves, but they definitely serve another purpose when they're used in the films. In the Blair Witch Project, we see an interview with the strange and religious Mary Brown. Some of her scenes were cut, but in the movie they do mention that she talked about a Bible passage being related to the rocks. The Blair Witch website featured 2 verses they think it might have been, but those are about power and anger breaking the rocks and don't seem to fit well with the mythology. However, fans have discovered a verse in the Bible which does talk about piles of rocks and seems a lot more appropriate. One translation of this, because there's tons based on all the different translations of the Bible, is that this mound is a witness and this pillar is a witness, that I will not go past this mound to harm you and you will not go past this mound and pillar to harm me. So if that was the verse that Mary Brown was thinking of, it can be inferred that these rocks act as a warning. Basically, turn back. If you pass these things, there's going to be trouble. Those symbols have ties to Elly, but the other powers we see are powerful, and likely their source is the evil in the woods, whether it's being channeled by Elly or not. The first of these powers is control over people. First by suggestion, as mentioned in the franchise when people hear whispering telling them what to do, and then as full control when someone is put in a trance and then acts accordingly to something else's will. There's also a sort of control over the woods that can keep people trapped there, looping around even after traveling in the same direction, which is a big part of the movies.
Where do you want to go to camp? I mean, I guess today south didn't work out, so tomorrow we'll go east. I don't know what to say, Josh.
There's also a power that seems to spirit away people's bodies. Many of the victims' bodies are never found throughout the franchise, but afterwards, the witch or evil spirit seems to be able to use or mimic those bodies in order to lure other people. And lastly, the most crazy power is the power over time. It's hard to describe since we don't know exactly how it works and what's at play, but we've seen nights go on forever with people trapped in them. We've seen them end up in places that only existed in the past. And we've seen situations where it does seem like people are in the same place and can't find each other, or time affects them in different ways.
When was the last time you saw us?
Earlier this afternoon.
You're not lying. It's been 5 days since we saw you.
So I believe while traveling under the woods, and once you're marked by this evil spirit or witch, you can get siphoned off into different pocket dimensions, which are kind of these spaces that take place at different points in time, where time flows differently there, and that can lead to all kinds of insanity, as you can imagine. So with that, let's get back to the timeline, starting off with Burkittsville. With Blair abandoned for decades, the town is eventually rediscovered by the construction of a new railway line that passes near it. The railway owner mentions this town to his friend Peter Browin Burkitt, who finds the land to be perfect for his needs and purchases it in 1824. He builds his new town Burkittsville there, not knowing anything about the curse. The next major event in Blair Witch lore takes place in August of 1825, just a year after the town was founded.
There was an incident that occurred involving a young child by the name of Eileen Trakel. This little girl was playing in a very shallow stream of water and she drowned.
Now, the creek was real shallow. It was only probably 6 to 8 inches deep.
Well, supposedly, according to the story, there was 12 witnesses who observed a ghostly white hand come up out of the water and drag the child under the water.
And for 13 days after the event, the creek became polluted with poisoned water and filled with oily bundles of sticks and strange stick figures.
Tappy East Creek has been possessed by a demon. Since Eileen's horrible death a fortnight past, the creek has been polluted by a foul oil and an abundance of strange totems.
This event gets echoed throughout a lot of the media, so we'll go through that in later videos. Next up, some legends of strange events in Burkittsville were found in journals from the era and have been used for the basis of some of the Blair Witch Chronicles comics. Since this is all secondary canon and maybe not considered canon depending on, your opinion, these stories could be truly part of the lore or just fabrications. The first takes place a couple years later in 1823 when Burkitt demands a church be part of the new town. 3 different ministers are sent to oversee the construction, and all 3 times the church burns down before being completed. The townsfolk blame a spirit in the woods for that trouble. Minister Matthew Edwards hears of this trouble and volunteers to oversee it. He takes the townspeople out into the woods to prove there's no spirit, but the townspeople turn on him. After hearing and obeying whispers from the woods, they tie him to a tree and burn him to death. They return to their lives, and the church construction finishes without another incident. Another one of the biggest parts of the canon Blair Witch lore is the Robin Weaver and Coffin Rock story. The story goes that in March of 1866, 8-year-old Robin Weaver goes missing.
And she told me that when she was a little girl, she had been walking in the woods one day, and this lady appeared to her. And she wasn't walking, she was floating in the air, really, and took her by the hand and led her to an old house back in the woods, and took her down in the basement and left her there and said she'd be back. And she left. And the little girl sat there, she said, for several hours, and finally she got scared. She ran, able to crawl through a window and ran back to town. But in the meantime, the town had started a search for this, sent out a search party to look for her in the woods.
When the entire search party failed to return, another search party was dispatched to find them.
And that search party come up on Coffin Hill, or Coffin Rock, and found those men.
The first search party had been killed, laid out on a flat rock in the woods. They had been disemboweled, and on their faces, their hands and feet were carved these strange pagan symbols. So the search party goes back to get help, and when they return, the bodies have vanished without a trace.
But they could still smell death in the air.
One of the other short stories that C.C. Malvey claims was related to him by the witch and adapted for the original Blair Witch comic implies that Robin Weaver was possessed by the witch and did the killings herself. So fans have debated if this is true or not. Robin never talks about the incident again afterwards, but from the Blair Witch Dossier and an interview with Bill Barnes, who knew her when she was an old lady, there's a really interesting bit that I love and I'm going to read it here. This takes place at the beginning of World War I, so Bill Barnes says, "I was just sitting on the steps of the general store with some friends of mine. I can't even recall who it was. And we were talking about how we should send someone who was really good at killing to take care of the Germans. And someone said, we should send them Rustin Parr. Well, then I said Rustin Parr wouldn't do no killing without those voices to guide him. And Miss Weaver, Robin Weaver, she walks by at just that moment and she says, yeah, Jesus, send the voices. I know those voices. Send them the voices." So yeah, I found that pretty funny, but it is confirmation that, Robin did hear the voice of the witch or the spirit and was influenced by it. The second volume of the Blair Witch PC games, The Legend of Coffin Rock, also provides a fictional account of this event. In the game, a soldier who was almost killed in the woods is saved by Robin and her grandmother, but has lost all his memories, and when Robin disappears, he goes to find her. Throughout the game, he remembers how the evil tormented him and his friends in the woods, and when he eventually finds Robin, she's being used by the evil spirit Hecatomix as part of a ritual at Coffin Rock to take over her body. The ritual is basically what's told in the legend, with the search party being displayed as described, but the soldier stops it. So yeah, we know that the Blair Witch games have called the evil in the woods Hecatomix and use it as an explanation for everything. Those aren't canon, but it's interesting to see. Lastly, one other story from the Blair Witch Chronicles takes place in 1911, where the hunters in the town leave offerings for the witch when they go hunting in the woods. However, when the Price family comes to town, the father is never told about the custom and ends up killing a doe without having left something. Shortly after, he goes crazy and kills his wife and kids and is gunned down by the townspeople. Again, not canon, but could be. And that's it for this episode. I was hoping to get past the first movie before the game came out, since it takes place after the events of the first movie, but before the footage was discovered, so a really interesting spot to take place. Unfortunately, I didn't get that far, so, if you're going to play the game a bit later on, all these videos should be up and you should have all the information. But until then, I might just put a quick note in the comments telling you what you need to know. So thanks for checking this out, stay subscribed for more stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!